Have you ever wondered what happens when the people who coldly erased me from their family tree beg me to save their empire on live national television? Tens of millions of people are watching. This is not a sudden act of revenge. It is a carefully orchestrated 22-year game where the most arrogant predators willingly step into a steel cage built by the exact child they threw away. Let us see how sharp the truth can really be. Hello, wonderful audience of Haley Revenge Stories. We are so grateful you are here to listen today. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely disabled our channel's monetization features, leaving us without the necessary budget to keep operating. If you find today's story compelling, please consider supporting us with just $1. This small contribution provides the funds to pay our hardworking staff for their living expenses, so they can continue creating these stories for you. You can donate by scanning the PayPal QR code currently on your screen or by clicking the PayPal link in the video description or pinned comment. My name is Cassidy Barnes. At 32 years old, I sit at the helm of the investigative documentary division for EchoStream Media, a colossal national broadcasting network headquartered in the bustling heart of Boston. I am the executive producer. I am the lead anchor. I am the woman who unearths buried corporate secrets and airs them out in the glaring light of primetime television. But the story of how I acquired this particular set of skills does not begin in a prestigious journalism classroom. It begins in a sprawling oceanfront mansion on Martha's Vineyard. Growing up, I was surrounded by a suffocating brand of luxury. It was the kind of wealth that demanded absolute perfection, whispering through imported marble floors and flawlessly manicured gardens. My parents, Arthur and Eleanor Vance, were the absolute epitome of high society vultures. They did not merely desire wealth, they demanded prestige. They craved the envy of their peers like oxygen. Every dinner party, every charity gala, every forced smile for the local society pages was a meticulously calculated move to secure their status at the top of the social food chain. Then, there was Harper. Harper is my twin sister. By the time we turned 7 years old, Harper was miraculously declared a violin prodigy. From that exact moment, she ceased to be a normal child and became the prized crown jewel of the Vance family legacy. My parents happily poured hundreds of thousands of dollars into her musical education every single year. They hired elite private tutors, purchased museum-grade instruments, and flew her across the globe to build the grand illusion of the perfect, culturally superior artistic family. Meanwhile, I was merely the spare. I was the unremarkable twin who preferred observing from the shadows of the library rather than performing in the drawing room. But I must clarify a very specific detail about my childhood. There were no beatings in our home. There were no physical scars, no screams echoing in the dead of night, and no bruises hidden beneath the sleeves of expensive private school uniforms. The cruelty inflicted upon me was entirely different. It was bureaucratic. It was a cold, calculated transaction that carried the faint, sterile scent of expensive legal paper. When we were 10 years old, the Vance family budget began to hemorrhage. Maintaining the facade of infinite wealth is an incredibly expensive endeavor. Between the exorbitant country club fees, the designer wardrobes, and Harper's increasingly demanding international competition tours, my parents realized they were bleeding cash rapidly. They needed to make a drastic cut to keep their social empire afloat. Arthur and Eleanor did not pack my bags in the middle of the night or abandon me on a street corner. That would have been too messy, too scandalous for their reputation. Instead, they sat in the heavily paneled office of a highly paid family lawyer and signed a formal relinquishment of guardianship contract. They legally surrendered me to the state, pushing me into a high-end government foster care facility. Their official, legally documented reasoning was that they were unable to meet my special educational needs. It was a brilliant, clinical legal loophole. By erasing me from the household ledger, they instantly freed up exactly enough capital to ensure Harper never missed a masterclass in Vienna or a recital in Paris. I was not a daughter. I was a financial liability that had to be liquidated. The state facility they dumped me in was pristine, heavily funded, and utterly devoid of human warmth. Most children in my position would have cried for days. They would have begged the social workers to let them go home. I did not shed a single tear. I sat quietly in the corner and watched everything. My eerie silence caught the attention of Beatrice Thorne. Beatrice was a sharp, fiercely intelligent, independent state financial auditor who occasionally visited to review the facility's compliance and funding allocations. Where the social workers saw a quiet, traumatized 10-year-old girl, Beatrice saw a fiercely calculating mind taking inventory of a broken world. She stepped in and became my mentor. She never offered me warm hugs or empty promises about a brighter future. Instead, she taught me how to read complex financial statements before I turned 12 years old. She showed me how money moved, how corrupt people hid their sins in thick ledgers, and how power was truly wielded behind closed doors. "Tears dry, Cassidy," she told me on one rainy afternoon while sliding a stack of audit reports across a table. "But a well-documented paper trail is forever." She taught me how to forge the truth, hard financial facts, and a relentless pen into the absolute deadliest weapons a discarded girl could possess. Now, 22 years later, the discarded budget cut is the face of a media empire. As I look out the floor-to-ceiling windows of my Boston corner office, I know that massive digital billboards bearing my face are currently lighting up the city. Advertisements for my highly anticipated live primetime documentary series are plastered across every major intersection and internet browser. I am inescapable, and knowing Arthur and Eleanor Vance, knowing their absolute obsession with public image and media trends, I am entirely certain they have seen my face beaming down at them. They know exactly who I am now. They are watching me, and they have absolutely no idea that they are walking straight into a trap 2 decades in the making. It took exactly 4 days after my promotional billboards went up for the email to arrive. The subject line read simply, "Family," as if 22 years of absolute silence could be bridged by a single casually typed word. The invitation was for dinner at a 3 Michelin-starred establishment in the Back Bay district, a place where a single plate of sea bass costs more than what some families spend on groceries in an entire month. It was the perfect, ridiculously overpriced stage for Arthur and Eleanor Vance. I arrived at exactly 8 o'clock in the evening. As the maitre d' led me through the dimly lit, opulent dining room toward an aggressively secluded VIP table in the back, I spotted them. Time had certainly sharpened their features, but the frantic, clawing desperation to look undeniably wealthy remained entirely untouched. Eleanor wore a tasteful, understated designer gown that screamed quiet luxury, while Arthur sported a bespoke suit perfectly tailored to hide the slight, defeated slump in his shoulders. The exact moment I approached the table, the theatrical performance began. Eleanor let out a perfectly timed, breathy gasp and pressed a manicured hand against her collarbone. "My beautiful girl," Eleanor whispered, her voice trembling with manufactured cinematic emotion. She stood up quickly and wrapped me in an embrace that smelled intensely of expensive floral perfume and profound panic. "Look at you. We have missed you so terribly much." Arthur immediately chimed in, offering a hearty, booming laugh that echoed off the heavy velvet walls. He firmly gripped my shoulder, seamlessly playing the role of the proud, affectionate patriarch. "We always knew you would do great things, kid. Always. It has been an absolute agony losing touch with you all these years." Losing touch. The phrase hung in the ambient air, incredibly offensive in its sheer casualness. You lose touch with a college roommate or a distant second cousin. You do not lose touch with a 10-year-old child you legally signed over to the state to free up cash flow. But I did not flinch. I did not glare or flip the table. Instead, I channeled every single ounce of my television training, softening my eyes and offering them a tight, visibly emotional smile. I played the exact character they desperately needed me to be, the wildly successful but secretly broken daughter, forever yearning for her parents' ultimate validation. "It has been a very long time," I said softly, taking my seat and carefully placing my napkin on my lap. "I am just glad we can finally sit down together like this." For the first 45 minutes, they danced around the ugly truth. They ordered vintage champagne and spoke endlessly about their upcoming charity galas, name-dropping local politicians and wealthy socialites with practiced, desperate ease. But I could clearly see the cracks in their porcelain masks. I noticed the way Arthur aggressively checked his heavy gold watch, and the slight nervous tremor in Eleanor's fingers every time she lifted her heavy crystal glass. They were drowning, and they needed a life raft urgently. Finally, as the untouched dessert plates were cleared away by the silent waitstaff, Arthur cleared his throat. He leaned across the table with an expression of deep, expertly manufactured sincerity. "We are actually here tonight because we want to share something magnificent with you," Arthur began, lowering his voice conspiratorially as if sharing a state secret. "Your sister, Harper, has taken over as the Supreme Executive Director of the Vanguard Music Academy. It is a legendary institution. But she is launching a massive new philanthropic initiative next week, aiming to secure a colossal federal grant and private endowments to the tune of $25 million. Eleanor seamlessly picked up the narrative thread, leaning in closer. "We were thinking, since your new live primetime show focuses on powerful local institutions, what better way to kick off your premiere than by featuring your own sister? An exclusive, glowing documentary segment about Harper and the Academy. It would be a beautiful story of family reunification, and it would give her the massive media push she needs to lock in those billionaire donors." There it was. The hook, the line, the sinker. They did not want a daughter. They never did. They wanted free premium airtime on a national broadcasting network to save their golden child's failing enterprise. I let a heavy moment of silence stretch between us, pretending to carefully weigh the massive ethical implications of using my television network to promote my own family. I looked down at my lap, where my sleek leather clutch rested. Hidden discreetly inside the silk lining was a high-grade, active audio recording device, quietly capturing every single spoken syllable. "I do not know," I hesitated, deliberately pitching my voice to sound slightly insecure and desperate to please. "My producers are very strict about our broadcast topics. Is the Academy truly in a financial position to handle that level of intense national scrutiny?" Arthur scoffed, waving his hand dismissively in the air, completely missing the gaping trap I had just laid out. "Oh, absolutely. We just need the narrative pushed over the finish line. The State Arts Council is dragging their feet, and frankly, the commercial banks are breathing down my neck about the bridge loans we use to keep the Academy's aesthetic upgrades afloat. We are entirely over-leveraged. If this grant does not come through by the end of the month, the foreclosure notices will not remain quiet much longer. We desperately need your platform." He froze instantly, his eyes widening as he realized exactly what he had just admitted out loud. Eleanor shot him a sharp, venomous glare that could have easily shattered the crystal glasses on the table. The grand illusion of their flawless, infinite wealth had just violently cracked open. Arthur had openly confessed to secret bank foreclosures and massive debt leverage. I smiled, a wide, remarkably genuine smile, and smoothly reached across the table to gently pat Arthur's rigidly tense hand. "Do not worry about a single thing, Dad," I said, making sure my voice was crystal clear for the microphone hidden in my bag. "I understand completely. You need a hero. Consider it done. I will completely restructure Friday night's live broadcast. It will be an absolute night honoring the Vance family and everything you have built." The absolute pathetic relief that washed over their aging faces was almost comical to witness. They genuinely believed they had won. They truly thought their discarded spare part was returning to save their broken machine. I stood up slowly, adjusting my coat, and looked down at the two of them. "I will see you both on Friday night. right in the front row of the VIP section. Wear your absolute best." "Thank you," Eleanor whispered, her eyes shining with what she probably convinced herself were real tears. "Of course," I replied smoothly, turning on my heel to leave the opulent restaurant. I stopped, glancing over my shoulder one last time, locking eyes with them both. Our family will get exactly what they deserve on national television. The morning sun had barely crested the Boston skyline, casting sharp, angular shadows across the 42nd floor of the EchoStream Media Tower. It was precisely 8 o'clock in the morning. I was standing by my panoramic window, watching the city traffic crawl like metallic ants, when the heavy frosted glass doors to my executive suite violently swung open. My assistant did not even have the chance to press the intercom warning button before the intruders breached my inner sanctuary. They marched in with the coordinated, predatory grace of people who believed they owned the very air they breathed. Harper Vance and her husband, Julian Sterling. Julian was a notorious Silicon Valley tech titan who had recently relocated his venture capital firm to the East Coast. He was a man composed entirely of sharp edges, wearing a charcoal custom-tailored suit that probably cost more than my entire production team earned in 6 months. Harper trailed half a step behind him, wrapped in an oversized cashmere coat, her sharp features set in a permanent, disdainful sneer. The tearful, desperate sister from the luxury restaurant last night had completely evaporated. In her place stood the arrogant, entitled prodigy who had spent her entire life stepping on my throat. Julian did not bother with pleasantries. He bypassed the comfortable guest chairs entirely, marching straight to my massive oak desk, and slammed a thick, leather-bound folder onto the polished surface. The sound cracked through the silent office like a gunshot. "Let us skip the heartwarming family reunion nonsense," Julian stated, his voice a low, gravelly threat that vibrated in the quiet room. "I do not care about whatever pathetic reconciliation you plotted with your parents last night. I care about my investments. And right now, my wife's academy is one of my most vulnerable assets. I am not leaving this building until we establish the absolute boundaries of this little television stunt you are pulling." He aggressively flipped the folder open. Inside rested a densely packed, legally suffocating non-disclosure agreement. It must have been at least 50 pages of dense legal jargon. Right next to the signature line, he placed a pristine, heavy stock bank check. The numbers printed across the center were unambiguous. $1 million. "Consider that a highly generous corporate sponsorship for your network," Julian continued, leaning over the desk so his face was inches from mine, attempting to use his physical size to intimidate me. "But this money comes with absolute, non-negotiable conditions. Section 4, Paragraph 2. You are legally barred from launching any independent financial inquiries into the Vanguard Music Academy. You are strictly prohibited from looking into its board members, its federal grant applications, or its private endowments." He tapped a manicured finger violently against the paper. "Section 5. You will not ask Harper a single unscripted question. My public relations team has already drafted the entire interview. You will read the teleprompter exactly as it is written. You will smile. You will play the supportive lesser sibling. You will paint my wife as the undisputed savior of modern classical music. If you deviate by a single syllable, if you even attempt to blindside her on live television, I will personally ensure this network drowns in so much litigation that your parent company will liquidate this entire investigative division by Monday morning. I employ a legal team that bills at $2,000 an hour. We will freeze your personal assets. We will drag you through civil courts for the next 10 years, and we will ensure no network ever allows you to broadcast again. I will crush your career into absolute dust. Do we understand each other?" The atmosphere in the office grew intensely suffocating. The air conditioning hummed, but it felt as though all the oxygen had been sucked out of the room by his sheer, overbearing arrogance. This was how the elite operated. They did not debate. They dictated. Harper finally stepped forward, emerging from Julian's shadow. Her eyes dragged up and down my tailored suit, dripping with raw contempt. Did you honestly think we did not see right through you? Harper sneered, crossing her arms tightly. You smiled so sweetly at dinner because you are starved for our attention. You always have been so utterly pathetic. You spent 22 years rotting in some state facility, and the second Mom and Dad toss you a bone, you come running back, wagging your tail. You want to feel important. You want to pretend you're on our level. Take the $1 million. Buy yourself something nice. It is the closest thing to an inheritance you are ever going to get from our family. She let out a harsh, mocking laugh. Just read the script, play your little part, and stay out of my way. You are a discarded spare. You are nothing but a minor, convenient tool for my success. Do not ever forget your place. They both stood there, radiating a toxic, overwhelming confidence, waiting for me to explode. They expected me to shout. They expected me to throw the check back in their faces, to defend my journalistic integrity, or to break down in tears over the brutal insults. They craved the drama so they could crush it. Instead, I did absolutely nothing of the sort. I kept my expression entirely unreadable. I calmly picked up my solid brass fountain pen from its velvet holder. I uncapped it with a soft click. Without hesitating for a single fraction of a second, without breaking eye contact with Julian, I pressed the nib to the paper and fluidly signed my full name on the final page of the restrictive non-disclosure agreement. Julian blinked, momentarily thrown off balance by the immediate surrender. He had prepared for a brutal war, not an instant capitulation. I picked up the check for $1 million, carefully folded it exactly in half, and slipped it into the breast pocket of my blazer. I then slid the signed contract across the desk toward him. I appreciate the generous sponsorship, Julian, I said, my voice completely devoid of any emotion, smooth as undisturbed ice. I assure you, I will follow the exact letter of this contract. I will not say a single negative word about your wife or her academy on Friday night. My lips are legally sealed. Harper smirked, throwing a triumphant look at her husband. She truly believed her vicious words had broken my spirit. Julian snatched the folder off the desk, his chest puffing out with absolute victorious arrogance. See that you do, Julian warned, adjusting his expensive tie. Smart girl. You finally learned how to follow orders. They turned around and marched out of my office, leaving the frosted glass doors open behind them. I stood perfectly still, listening to the sharp clicking of Harper's designer heels fading down the marble hallway. They thought they had just bought my absolute obedience. They believed they had successfully muzzled the watchdog with a mountain of cash and legal threats. I reached into my pocket and felt the crisp edge of the $1 million check. A slow, chilling smile finally spread across my face. Julian Sterling was indeed a brilliant technology investor, but he was a remarkably arrogant lawyer. He was so focused on legally silencing my voice that he completely failed to consider the glaring, fatal loophole in his ironclad document. The instant the heavy frosted glass doors clicked shut behind them, the temperature in my office drastically shifted. I did not sit down. I did not waste a single second admiring the $1 million check resting in my pocket. I immediately slammed my hand onto the red flashing button of my secure intercom line, connecting directly to the master control room located deep in the basement of the building. Marcus, I ordered, my voice sharp, authoritative, and entirely stripped of the docile, obedient tone I had just performed. Initiate Protocol 0 immediately. I want an absolute total lockdown on Friday night's live broadcast. Understood, Cassidy, my lead technical director replied through the encrypted static, sensing the immediate urgency. What are the specific parameters? Sever all external network access to the teleprompter feeds. Reroute the primary audio and video mixing boards to our isolated local server. Nobody outside of our immediate, trusted investigative unit gets to see or hear the final run of show. If Julian Sterling's public relations team demands a digital feed to monitor our progress, give them a pre-recorded dummy loop. Lock the physical doors to the control room. If anyone from corporate tries to enter, you tell them it is a live network security test. I released the intercom button and pulled the signed restrictive non-disclosure agreement out of my drawer. It was a brilliant masterpiece of corporate suppression, but Julian Sterling was fundamentally flawed. He thought exactly like a tech billionaire trying to legally protect a fragile asset, not like a seasoned investigative journalist who spent years learning how to completely dismantle a lie. He made absolutely sure the contract strictly forbade me, Cassidy Barnes, from uttering a single defamatory or unscripted syllable about the Vanguard Music Academy. It explicitly prohibited me from presenting any derogatory financial documents with my own hands. But a live national television broadcast is never a monologue. It is an active conversation. And Julian's $2,000 an hour lawyers had completely failed to put a legal gag order on my guests. I picked up my secure cell phone and dialed a highly restricted number I knew entirely by heart. It rang exactly twice before the line connected. "Tell me you have the final federal subpoenas ready to execute," I said, pacing across the hardwood floor, staring out at the sprawling Boston skyline. "I have had them fully authorized and ready for 3 weeks, Cassidy," Beatrice Thorne's crisp, unwavering voice replied through the speaker. She was no longer just the independent state auditor who taught a discarded 10-year-old girl how to read financial ledgers. Beatrice was now the ruthless, highly feared director of the State Anti-Corruption Commission. "The documented paper trail on your family is the most arrogant, sloppy display of wire fraud I have seen in my entire 30-year career. We are locked and loaded." "Perfect. You are officially my unannounced special guest. I am smuggling you into the studio through the rear freight elevator at exactly 7 o'clock on Friday evening. Your name will not appear on any guest manifest. You will be entirely scrubbed from all promotional materials and security logs. For the next 48 hours, my investigative unit operated entirely in the shadows. We moved like invisible phantoms within our own broadcasting network. While Julian and Harper confidently approved the glowing, sycophantic script I deliberately submitted to their public relations team, my trusted editors and I were locked inside an unlisted, soundproof editing bay on the sub-basement level. We were rapidly cutting a secondary documentary. It was a vicious, tightly edited video package of raw, undeniable truth. We compiled high-definition digital scans of forged bank ledgers, hidden offshore accounts, and the absolute proof of millions of dollars meant for underprivileged children being funneled directly into Arthur Vance's underground gambling debts and Harper's luxurious, unsustainable lifestyle. I instructed Marcus to wire a custom physical trigger switch directly under the wooden lip of my anchor podium on the main stage. One single press of that hidden button would instantly override the master control board, hijack the giant LED screens behind me, and broadcast our shadow documentary to tens of millions of viewers across the nation. When Friday night finally arrived, the atmosphere inside the main studio was absolutely electric. The network makeup team desperately tried to dress me in a soft pastel blouse, aggressively arguing it would make me look more sympathetic and familial for the highly anticipated emotional reunion. I dismissed them immediately. I bypassed the studio wardrobe department entirely and pulled out the heavy garment bag I had brought straight from my own closet. I slipped into a razor-sharp, flawlessly tailored, blindingly white power suit. It was not the outfit of a grateful, discarded child returning to the familial fold. It was the imposing armor of an executioner who operates firmly in broad daylight. I checked the hidden earpiece in my right ear, adjusted the crisp lapel of my jacket, and confidently walked out of my private dressing room. The overhead studio lights were hot and blinding. The massive live audience was already buzzing with feverish anticipation. I stepped onto the sleek, polished black floor of the main stage and rested my hands firmly on the glass podium, my right index finger lightly brushing the cold metal of the hidden button underneath. The trap was officially set. The steel cage was locked. It was time to welcome my prey. The voice of Marcus, my lead technical director, crackled sharply in my hidden earpiece. He began the final, irreversible countdown. 10, 9, 8. The massive, cavernous space of the broadcasting studio plunged into absolute silence. The live audience, packed tightly into the tiered seating holding over 500 people, held their collective breath. The heavy robotic arm of the main jib camera swept elegantly over their heads, its glowing red tally light signaling that we were officially live. At this exact second, across the country, tens of millions of viewers were tuning in from their living rooms, expecting a heartwarming evening of family reconciliation and investigative triumph. I stood behind the sleek glass podium, bathing in the intense, blinding heat of the overhead studio lights. My white power suit practically glowed against the dark, dramatic backdrop of the stage. Directly in my line of sight, positioned strategically in the ultra-exclusive VIP seating section front and center, sat the Vance family. They were putting on the performance of a lifetime. Eleanor Vance wore a soft, powder blue designer dress, chosen specifically to make her look maternal and approachable. She was clutching a delicate lace handkerchief, already dabbing at the dry corners of her eyes, preemptively playing the role of the overwhelmed, loving mother. Beside her, Arthur sat tall and proud, wearing a conservative dark navy suit. He had his arm wrapped tightly around Harper, projecting the image of a fiercely protective patriarch. Harper herself looked like an absolute angel. She was dressed in a pristine, flowing gown, her hair styled in soft waves, projecting the exact image of a delicate, brilliant musical prodigy who dedicated her life to the arts. And then there was Julian Sterling. He sat comfortably on the edge of the front row, completely separated from the emotional family tableau. He had his legs casually crossed, his expensive tailored jacket unbuttoned, and a sickeningly smug, triumphant smirk plastered across his sharp face. He was looking up at me not as a television host, but as an employee. In his arrogant mind, he had successfully purchased this entire broadcast for exactly $1 million. He truly believed his wealth had chained me to the stage, forcing me to dance for his amusement. I looked directly into the primary lens of camera 1. I smiled. It was a warm, bright, completely non-threatening smile. I began to speak, perfectly matching the gentle, uplifting tone of the pre-approved public relations script scrolling up the teleprompter screen. Good evening, America. Tonight, we are stepping away from the dark shadows of corporate corruption to shine a spotlight on something truly beautiful, I said, my voice projecting smoothly across the silent studio. We are looking at the power of art, the importance of philanthropy, and above all else, the unbreakable, enduring bonds of family. I adhered to the non-disclosure agreement with absolute terrifying precision. For the next 15 minutes, I did exactly what Julian Sterling had paid me to do. I did not utter a single negative syllable. I painted the Vanguard Music Academy as the absolute pinnacle of modern classical education. I described Harper Vance as a visionary director, a woman who sacrificed her own performing career to nurture the next generation of musical genius. I spoke at length about Arthur and Eleanor, praising their lifelong, unwavering dedication to funding the arts and supporting their children's grandest ambitions. The dramatic irony hovering in the studio was so thick, it was practically suffocating. The millions of viewers watching from their homes were undoubtedly feeling their hearts warm. They saw a wildly successful journalist finally making peace with her estranged, loving family. But I knew the truth, and the audience would soon realize that the pristine, beautiful painting I was currently presenting was actually drawn entirely with gasoline, just waiting for a single spark. I paused to let the audience applaud after a particularly nauseating compliment about Harper's charitable endeavors. The camera immediately cut to a tight, high-definition close-up of my family. Eleanor finally squeezed out a perfectly formed, glittering crocodile tear. Arthur leaned over and kissed Harper's forehead. Harper looked directly into the camera and placed a hand over her heart, mouthing the words, "Thank you," with practiced, flawless grace. Down in the front row, Julian caught my eye. He gave me a barely perceptible nod of approval. He was relaxing. The tension in his shoulders was melting away. He thought the danger had officially passed. We were 20 minutes into the broadcast. The script was nearing its end, and I had been nothing but an obedient, highly paid mouthpiece. I turned my attention back to camera 1. The teleprompter screen continued to roll, displaying the final concluding remarks Julian's team had written for me. But I did not read them. I stopped speaking. The sudden, unscripted silence stretched across the studio. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. In live television, 3 seconds of dead air feels like an absolute eternity. The smiles on the faces of the Vance family faltered slightly, a microscopic flicker of confusion breaking through their perfect masks. Julian uncrossed his legs, his brow furrowing as he noticed my eyes were no longer tracking the moving text on the glass screen. Everything I have just shared with you tonight about the Vanguard Music Academy is a remarkable story, I said softly, completely abandoning the teleprompter. My voice lost its warm, fuzzy edge, shifting back into the cold, sharp cadence of an investigative journalist. However, because I am the host of this program, and because I share a bloodline with the subjects of tonight's broadcast, my praise might naturally lack the necessary objectivity. A low murmur rippled through the studio audience. This was not in the promotional materials. The American public deserves absolute, unvarnished transparency, I continued, my voice growing louder, commanding the entire room. You deserve to know exactly where the millions of dollars in federal grants and private donations are truly going. Therefore, I respectfully yield the floor to someone who understands the financial realities and the true, undocumented contributions of the Vance family better than anyone else alive. Julian Sterling realized what was happening exactly 1 second too late. His eyes widened in sheer panic. He gripped the armrests of his chair, his knuckles turning entirely white. "Marcus," I whispered into my lapel microphone, my voice barely a breath. "Open the gates." The massive, heavy LED screens at the back of the stage slowly parted down the middle with a deep, mechanical hum. The warm, inviting stage lights instantly shifted, turning into harsh, bright, unforgiving interrogation beams. Out of the shadows stepped Beatrice Thorne. She was not wearing a glamorous gown or a soft pastel blouse. She strode onto the national television stage, wearing the intimidating, perfectly pressed dark uniform of a senior government auditor. Pinned to her lapel was the heavy silver badge of the State Anti-Corruption Commission. In her hands, she carried a massive, thick binder filled with hundreds of pages of raw, undeniable financial evidence. She walked with the slow, deliberate, heavy footsteps of absolute doom. The transformation in the VIP section was instantaneous and violent. Arthur Vance's face drained of all color, turning a sickly, ash gray. Eleanor let out a genuine, stifled gasp of pure horror, dropping her delicate lace handkerchief onto the floor. Harper froze completely, looking as though she had just been struck by lightning, her perfect posture crumbling into a terrified slump. Julian Sterling exploded out of his seat. His face was twisted in absolute rage. He opened his mouth, ready to scream, ready to order the cameras to stop rolling, ready to throw his billions of dollars around to shut the entire network down. He took one aggressive step toward the edge of the stage. Before his foot could even touch the first step, two massive, broad-shouldered network security guards stepped directly into his path, forming an impenetrable human wall of solid muscle and black fabric. Julian slammed into them, but they did not budge a single inch. "Sir, please return to your seat," one of the guards ordered, his voice dangerously low. "You are interfering with a live national broadcast." Julian was entirely trapped. He could not throw a punch. He could not scream obscenities. Tens of millions of people were watching his every single move in high definition. The brilliant, arrogant billionaire was completely paralyzed by the very media exposure he had tried to purchase. He was forced to stand there, utterly helpless, as Beatrice Thorne approached the center microphone, opened her massive binder, and prepared to burn his entire empire to the ground. The microphone stand let out a sharp metallic screech as Beatrice Thorne adjusted it, instantly silencing whatever faint murmurs were left in the room. She did not look at me. She did not look at the cameras. She stared directly down at the VIP section, like a hawk locking onto its prey. "My name is Beatrice Thorne," she announced, her voice booming with the absolute authority of a career investigator. "I am the director of the State Anti-Corruption Commission, and I am entirely unbound by any corporate non-disclosure agreements signed in private offices." I slid my finger under the wooden lip of my podium. I pressed the hidden button. Instantly, the giant LED screens behind me exploded with high-definition images. I did not say a single word. I kept my mouth firmly shut, adhering perfectly to Julian Sterling's ironclad contract. I was merely the conductor of this symphony of ruin, letting the visual evidence do the screaming. "For the past 4 years," Beatrice continued, her voice echoing over the stadium speakers, "the Vanguard Music Academy has presented itself as a beacon of artistic philanthropy. In reality, it is a meticulously constructed shell company designed for massive financial fraud. Tonight, we are looking at the embezzlement of over $4 million from federal grants specifically earmarked for underprivileged youth music programs." On the screen behind me, a massive, undeniably clear flowchart materialized. It tracked digital wire transfers from the state treasury directly into the Academy's nonprofit accounts, and then immediately funneled them out into a labyrinth of offshore holding companies. "Those funds," Beatrice proclaimed, flipping a page in her thick binder, "never bought a single violin for a child in need. Instead, hundreds of thousands of dollars were systematically drained to pay off extraordinary, illicit gambling debts incurred by Arthur Vance at unregulated offshore casinos." The screen flashed violently, displaying scanned copies of Arthur's personal promissory notes, complete with his undeniable signature, alongside casino wire receipts matching the exact amounts missing from the Children's Charity Fund. Arthur completely lost his mind. The polished, aristocratic patriarch shattered into 1,000 pieces of pathetic panic. He jumped up from his front row seat, his face sweating profusely under the studio lights. "It was her idea," Arthur screamed, his voice cracking wildly as he pointed a violently shaking finger directly at his own wife. "Eleanor handled the accounts. She was the one who set up the offshore trusts. I had absolutely nothing to do with the routing numbers." Eleanor recoiled, as if she had just been physically struck. Her maternal mask dissolved into sheer, unadulterated venom. "You absolute coward!" she shrieked back at him, completely forgetting the millions of people watching. "You gambled away our entire estate. You begged me to fix it. You begged me." The studio audience erupted into a chaotic symphony of gasps and outraged whispers. But Beatrice was not finished. "Furthermore," she projected over their screaming match, "an additional $2 million of stolen federal money was diverted into private accounts controlled by Harper Vance to fund an unsustainable, exorbitant luxury lifestyle, including private jet leases and a sprawling estate in the Hamptons." The LED screens behind me shifted to show Harper's lavish, heavily filtered social media posts, juxtaposed with the stark, cold bank statements proving those exact vacations were paid for by the stolen charity funds. Harper let out a raw, guttural wail. Her perfect posture collapsed. She spun around wildly, her eyes wide with terror, and threw herself toward the edge of the seating area. She grabbed the sleeve of Julian Sterling's custom charcoal jacket. "Julian, do something!" Harper sobbed hysterically, her immaculate makeup running down her face in dark streaks. "Call your lawyers. Stop the broadcast. You promised you would protect me. Fix this right now." Julian looked down at his wife's clutching hands. The smug, arrogant tech titan who had threatened to destroy my career only a few hours ago was now calculating his own survival. He looked at the undeniable evidence glowing on the national broadcast. He looked at the furious studio audience. He realized his entire corporate empire, his stock prices, and his board of directors were currently bleeding out by association. Julian violently ripped his arm away, shoving Harper backwards so forcefully she stumbled into her chair. "Do not touch me," Julian snarled, his voice loud enough to be picked up by the boom microphones hovering above them. He turned his back on her entirely and faced the closest television camera. He straightened his tie, his face morphing into a mask of cold, calculated corporate distancing. "I am absolutely appalled by these revelations. I had zero knowledge of this criminal enterprise. As of this exact moment, I am filing for an immediate, irrevocable divorce. I will fully cooperate with all federal authorities to ensure these criminals are prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law." He threw her to the wolves without a single second of hesitation. Harper collapsed into her seat, burying her face in her hands, completely destroyed. "But the financial crimes are only a symptom of a much deeper moral rot," Beatrice declared, her voice dropping into a solemn, heavy register. "The Vance family has spent the entire week parading their deep emotional bond with their estranged daughter, Cassidy Barnes, using her platform to project an image of a loving, reunited family." I stood perfectly still, my face entirely stoic. "Let us examine the truth of that separation," Beatrice said. The giant screen behind me went entirely black for one dramatic second. Then, a single, stark document appeared. It was not a bank statement. It was a scanned copy of a legal contract from 22 years ago. The words, "Voluntary Relinquishment of Parental Rights," were printed in bold, undeniable letters across the top. "Arthur and Eleanor Vance did not lose touch with their daughter," Beatrice announced to the dead silent room. "They legally discarded a 10-year-old child, surrendering her to the state foster care system because she was deemed a financial liability to their social climbing. They threw her away to save their budget." The reaction from the studio audience was instantaneous and deafening. The polite gasps turned into a roaring wave of absolute visceral disgust. 500 people began booing, jeering, and shouting at the three figures cowering in the VIP section. The carefully constructed, decades-long illusion of the perfect Vance family was not just broken, it was incinerated. At that exact moment, the heavy double doors at the back of the studio swung open. A team of 12 men and women wearing dark windbreakers with the bright yellow letters of the Federal Bureau of Investigation printed on their backs marched down the center aisle. They moved with swift, terrifying purpose. The live broadcast captured every single humiliating second. The federal agents bypassed the security guards and descended upon the VIP section. "Arthur Vance, Harper Vance, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, embezzlement of government funds, and conspiracy," the lead agent commanded, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. Arthur tried to stammer out a defense, but an agent swiftly pulled his arms behind his back, the metallic click of the cuffs echoing sharply through the room. Harper thrashed and screamed, demanding to speak to Julian, but another agent forcefully secured her wrists, marching her up the aisle. Eleanor was left entirely alone, sobbing uncontrollably, surrounded by the deafening boos of the very public whose adoration she had spent her entire life chasing. I remained entirely silent. I did not gloat. I did not sneer. I simply watched them being paraded out of the studio, their reputations permanently destroyed on live television in front of tens of millions of people. As the chaotic noise of the studio swirled around me, I calmly reached into the breast pocket of my blindingly white suit. My fingers brushed against the crisp edge of the $1 million check Julian Sterling had so arrogantly forced upon me. It was entirely legal compensation for a contract I had followed to the absolute letter. I had not broken a single rule. I had simply let the truth do the breaking. I looked into the main camera lens. The red tally light was still glowing warmly. The last tether of my painful, suffocating past had just been violently severed. I had never felt so terrifyingly light, so completely free, and so incredibly powerful. I allowed myself one slow, entirely genuine smile. Fade to black. Hello again, wonderful listeners of Haley Revenge Stories. I want to sincerely thank you for staying with me until the very end of this journey. We would love to know where you are tuning in from today, so please leave a comment letting us know your city or country. If you found today's story engaging and satisfying, please consider helping our channel with a small contribution of just $1. You can easily do this by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen or by clicking the PayPal link provided in the description or the pinned comment below. Your kindness allows us to pay our dedicated staff so they can support their families and keep bringing these powerful stories to life for you. Thank you for your time, and we will see you in the next story.